Many years ago, I quit my well-paying globe-trotting job because I got sick of it. I couldn't even force myself to enjoy it, knowing I had to work in an utterly misogynistic environment. My former colleagues spoke without challenge of male brains and female brains, women's role in society, the scientific reason behind a woman's subordinate position to that of a man. Any occasional opposing view would be shot down, trolled, and silenced. The thought of running this man-made rat race riddled me with depression. I resolved to choose my conscience over capital. I have since been making films, writing, and engaging in women's rights activism with several grassroots organizations all over the world. I have never felt tempted to go back to a 9-to-5 routine, even when I know the life it can afford me. Like most women, I followed the choice model of liberal feminism in my initial days of activism. But soon I found it to be contrary to women's rights, and that liberal feminism was making oppression seem like empowerment. Once I saw its flaws, the online abuse and cancel culture that many women faced made a lot of sense. There was an active mob of people seeking to abuse those women who renounced liberal feminism and stood up for women's true liberation. A film I made was supposed to be screened in New York City, but I received a rather cold email from the organizer, Police Project, that it was cancelled. Their reason? My transphobic tweets about trans-identified males in women's shelters, prisons, bathrooms, and women's sports. Someone dug up tweets from more than a year prior and brought it to the organizer's attention. As a result, the Police Project thought it was only fair to shelve a screening of India's only film on sexual violence that affects women, especially from the marginalized communities. Having grown up in a small town, I have watched many women from my family and others endure profound violence throughout their entire lives. When I quit my job, I strived to spend most of my life working with marginalized women. But I was simply not the right flavor of woke for the postmodern queer theory espousing daisies of Manhattan. Feminists like me have suffered a loss of livelihood, have been heckled, cancelled, and deplatformed because liberal feminist organizations would much rather derail important feminist work and shamelessly center men in everything they do. While the effects of that cancellation linger on, it is comforting to know that there are others who, like me, have vowed to keep speaking up, no matter what the consequences.
The focus of my studies was actually men who pay for sex. So I was researching prostitution, but I have been involved in women's rights for a very long time. So I had a master's degree in women, gender, and sexuality studies. My undergrad, I had a specialty in women's studies. And my whole professional career, I have been working on women's shelters and on the women's sector. So when I arrived in the UK, I saw that there were these discussions taking place to talk about a piece of legislation which affected women's rights. So I was invited to share a meeting for Women's Place UK on the 8th of February 2018. Immediately as my name went out that I was going to be sharing this meeting, I wasn't even speaking, I was sharing it. Immediately after that happened, then this massive campaign of vilification started inside of the University of Bristol by other students. And it involved hundreds of people, and they were inviting people from other universities, people from other countries even, to sort of participate on this massive pylon. And the purpose of that pylon was to bully me. It was like a target was put on my back, you know, that not only did I have these opinions, but that I was not going to be silent. Any other topic, the policies would have been upheld. But because we're talking about the entitlement of trans rights activists, then it's sort of like all policies go out the window. The law goes out the window.
No TERFs on our turf! 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 No TERFs on our turf!
I joined the Labour Party about 40 years ago. I served as a councillor in a local administration and then as a member of Parliament for 18 years. And for the past 15 years, I've been a member of the House of Lords. The Labour Party warned me in 2019, in January, that there had been complaints made about certain things I had supported. In May, I was informed that there was going to be an inquiry, formal inquiry into my behaviour. Now, this happened to coincide with me hosting a meeting in Parliament for women's organisations on the subject of women's rights. And a clear attempt was made to shut the meeting down. That's when I was informed online, by email, that there was going to be an inquiry, and I immediately wrote back to them, told them to get lost, said I was resigning from the Labour Party with immediate effect.
So at the time that my research was published, I was working with I had a consulting position, and there were individuals that, were very opposed to my research, and they wrote an email to the directors of where I was working saying, we don't like this research. We think that it's going to do bad things. We want you to fire Dr. Littman immediately. My responsibilities did not have to do with gender dysphoria. It was things along the lines of pregnancy, prematurity, oral health care for pregnant women, really unrelated. Ultimately, I did lose that consulting position.
The last campaign was interesting in the capture of Labour Party, Liberal Party policy by the trans movement. People like Jeremy announcing their pronouns, the attempt to shut down all debate on the subject, the hope it will all just go away. In the meantime, of course, the people in this country have been waking up to the fact that something is wrong, that men should not be invading women's spaces. So there have been several occasions in London and elsewhere where men who say they are women have stood for election as women's officers and been gleefully accepted by other people trying to appear woke and inclusive. Madigan is a particularly egregious example of this. A young man of no perceived ability and no experience, clearly to my mind, a troubled young man. I can't honestly say that his presence in the Labour Party is a good thing.
Theodore Adorno wrote a marvellous paper called Group Psychology and the Nature of Fascist Propaganda. Now, what he was interested in is how is it that groups take up these crazy beliefs. Now, what Adorno said about the fascist group, the mob, is that somewhere in their minds, they know the whole thing is an illusion. They know it. They know the Jew isn't a contaminating bacillus that's poisoning society. They know that the Aryan isn't really Superman. They know all these things, but they cannot bear to know that they know them. I'm not saying, the trans organizations are fascist, but I do think there's an element, often by extreme situations, because it becomes so clear, can show us elements of what's going on in the so-called normal.
The case is not about the political movement, but I think undoubtedly the powerful political lobbies of the sort of pro-trans movement that have managed to obscure the line between sort of gender ideology or genderism and sex, biological sex. And they have managed to convince authorities, like the World Health Organization, charities, governments, the police, they've captured a lot, and particularly the legal world, which is worrying. And so we have a situation where the argument for something is so powerfully put on the basis of something that's actually a belief. It's not a fact.
And a number of political journalists have written about this, saying they've never known anything go through all the political doors so rapidly, and never known anything go so rapidly with so little thought. No working parties set up, investigate, find out, wave through, thinking wrongly that that's a kind of liberal political attitude, and not recognizing the complexity of the field, and also the way this is creating the context for this rapid escalation of doing irredeemable damage to children's bodies.
The only important issues to politicians at the end of the day is what's going to cost them votes. And this is an issue which is going to cost them votes. Trans people, they're allies among white middle-class women in the main, middle-class students at universities, little knots here and there. We have the same up here in Scotland. But they are a tiny minority compared to the general population. They rely on people being asleep. And people in this country are no longer asleep.
I honestly tried to get a lawsuit multiple times. I have had 6 to 7 attorneys turn me away because they are too scared to fight the LGBT community and the human rights campaign.
I got 8 attorneys. Actually, I signed paperwork for 8 attorneys. Each attorney was very, very excited in the beginning, because it is clearly what happened to me was wrong. They were excited for the first 2 weeks, asked a couple of questions, and then they decided they couldn't take me.
During the time, due to the coronavirus, we have passed my date of statute of limitations, and the courts are thinking about extending it, but it is unknown right now. They're more than likely going to extend it, but if I can't find an attorney that'll take the case in a month, then I have no luck.
Within 2 months of hormones, I went in to have a hysterectomy and have a top surgery. That surgery didn't go well. They cut my bladder. They weren't able to do the top surgery and the hysterectomy, so they had to let me heal from that. I healed for about 6 weeks, and then I had the surgery. So then I had a phalloplasty. After the phalloplasty, I had a pulmonary embolism that ended in a stress heart attack. Went home from that. After that, I started not to feel well. I started to have kind of a yellow substance sticking through my arm. And 2 days later, I was in the ER in another ambulance to Dallas for a sepsis surgery. I had developed sepsis. While I was in the hospital, I had a surgeon come by and say, you do know that you have a ligament protruding through your arm, right? And that you're probably going to have a disfigured arm for life. I had 6 inches of hair on the inside of my urethra. So basically, if you've ever had an ingrown hair, like on your leg or on your hair or on your face, it's very, very painful, right? And it creates that pus and that infection. After 17 months, I finally had that hair removed. But at that point, from the infection, I had lost all my hair. I was dying. I mean, I had gained probably about 60 pounds of water weight. I'll never forget the conversation. He was actually the nicest. The last attorney that I talked to was the nicest attorney that I talked to. He said, Scott, trans health is experimental. So what you had done to you was experimental. Doing a medical malpractice case on any type of medical transition requires that there needs to be a baseline for care. There is no baseline. The W path is full of at doctor's discretions. It was, in his opinion, written to do what it's doing now, which is convince people that medical transitioning is safe.
It was a very hard time when we did the House bill and the Senate bill, and they both passed. We won both cases for Alabama to do the Vulnerable Child Protection Act for kids to have to be 18 to be able to start hormones. There were at least 100 to 200 people there just for the trans community. And we had like 10 of us, 10 to 20 of us. We were the minority. It was not looking good for us at all. The Human Rights Campaign was there. We had a lot of opposing people there. It got very ugly. There was death threats made. We had to have security come in. Due to the coronavirus, everything's calmed down a lot from it, but they have basically asked us to come back for a retrial.
Originally, the case we were doing was a judicial review, and I was a claimant in the case with Mrs. A, the mother of a child who had autism, but also was expressing gender dysphoria and a wish to transition. Then I learned of Keira Bell and through another newspaper article, and so we spoke, and it seemed much more appropriate that she was wanting to speak out about it and take a case, and it seemed the right thing for her to be one of the claimants in the case. So I've stepped aside. I'm now a witness in the case. Mrs. A and Keira are the claimants.
The case was a very specific case about whether children under the age of 18 are able to give fully informed consent to the treatment of blockers and hormones. So that involved looking at evidence of what is the purpose of puberty blockers. Does it work? Are there benefits? Is there evidence that the treatment is beneficial? What evidence is there on the impact of the treatments? Is it for the purpose of buying time, or is it a stepping stone to cross-sex hormones that children can take at age 16? The issue of Gillick competence, which is whether a child has the maturity to understand the effects of the treatment to the extent that they're able to give full consent to the treatment. And Gillick competence is applied to children under the age of 16. Over the age of 16, it's a different legal position that children are assumed to have competence to make fully informed decisions about treatments. The court was looking at whether any child under the age of 16 has the degree of maturity and understanding to fully appreciate all of the effects of puberty blockers. And the court came to the decision that it's highly unlikely that any child under the age of 13 can fully comprehend the effects of taking puberty blockers, and children of the ages of 14 and 15, it is very doubtful that any child could fully understand the implications of the treatment, no matter how much information they were given.
I'm delighted at the judgment of the court today. It was a judgment that will protect vulnerable people. I wish it had been made for me before I embarked on the devastating experiment of puberty blockers. My life would be very different today. My hope was that outside of the noise of the culture wars, the court would shine a light on this harmful experiment on vulnerable children and young people. This judgment is not political, it's about the protection of vulnerable children.
The Tavistock have been doing a trial, or what they call the early intervention study. So they started in 2011 giving puberty blockers to children from the age of 12, and then they lowered that to Tanner stage 2 of puberty, which could include 10-year-olds. That trial study, the results have never been published. 9 years down the line, we still do not have the results of that study. Professor Michael Biggs of Oxford University wrote a piece for Transgender Trend on interim results of that study that he found in his research, which showed really negative results. The judgment is saying that for 9 years in this country, we've been giving children a treatment, a life-changing treatment they can't consent to. The children now that are already on the pathway are the ones that are of immediate concern. What should have happened as soon as this case was accepted for a judicial review, the NHS and the Tavistock should have been working on building up a really robust mental health service in case of this result. And they've had a year to do that. It's going to be really hard for those children, but the responsibility for that lies with the NHS, it lies with the Tavistock JIDs, and it lies with the lobby groups who have been treating children in a political way.
there's a whole culture of incentivizing girls and women, but particularly young girls, into trying to opt out of being female. And I think that gender clinics are full of teenage girls right now because it is a capitalist approved idea. Raising girls to be courageous and strong and to take on all of the patriarchal structures, that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. It is harder for the girls, it takes a lot from you, But saying to a girl, well, actually, you can just become a boy and you don't have to face anything that females face, it's not a coincidence that these ideas are becoming so popular, because they are a way to make a lot of money by tapping into that current of misogyny. Because it teaches girls that there's all of this abuse that females received, but actually you have the power in your own hands to opt out of it if you want to, and if you want to spend an insane amount of money doing it. But then the message of that is that all those other women who receive the abuse and continue to call themselves women, that is somehow their fault. Because if only they wanted to, they could opt out of it.
The people that I've seen here in my own practice are generally white, middle to upper middle class kids. And I suspect that's because I'm in a private practice, and so families need to have a certain income to be able to pay for treatment. And I suspect the hospital gender clinics probably see a different, a different demographic. We know that racial minorities and lower socioeconomic classes experience much more domestic violence, sexual abuse, discrimination, social adversity, dislocation. The whole explosion of gender dysphoria is that in many cases, traumatic experiences are part of why this emerges. So, I think there is a connection to race and poverty, if you look at it that way, just in terms of trauma and adversity.
Like a lot of people, even people from global South countries like the Dominican Republic, you look at what is happening in the UK, you look at what's happening in Canada, you look at what's happening in the US when it comes to women's sports. But what a lot of people don't know is that these same policies are being applied, or people are trying to apply them to our own countries in the global South, but there's a lot of silence regarding that. Like, for example, in the Dominican Republic, but also in a lot of other countries in the region, what people who advocate for gender identity policies are doing is that they use stealth to try to hide this from the public. So you're not going to see a front page that says, we want to impose gender identity in this country. What you're going to see is a lot of backdoor lobbying and a lot of activists trying to use influence and power and money to try to impose this on a population that is completely unaware of what is actually happening. Queer theory and postmodernism, these are ideas that were created in the global north, in the academias of these very wealthy countries. But then those theories are imposed on global South countries and on those same girls whose realities they are ignoring. Because the consequences, the brunt of these public policies are not experienced by the wealthy people who come up with them. They are experienced by the poorest, more marginalized people who don't have enough resources to defend themselves against that impact.
children's toys and books and children's marketing is extremely gendered now into pink and blue. It wasn't really in the 70s when I was growing up. So children are trained into those stereotypes in childhood.
Back in the 70s, there was the push was really about expanding on what interests and occupations and aesthetics and fashion that females could have, and the same for males. And I feel like more recently, not only has that lost ground, but maybe sort of the teenagers of, currently and maybe a little bit in the past, basically went back to these extreme stereotypes in order to reject them.
We have always known that as a political movement, you have to keep your doors open and your arms open to receive the girls and the women who thought that by changing themselves, they could change patriarchy.
It's almost like as a protest to the limitations and restrictions that our culture places on how you can be as a woman, young people are now turning to transition as opposed to, everything that the feminist movement stood for and still stands for, which is to reject gender roles and to reject gender ideology even.
I think there's real harm that is being done to girls and women at this period in time. But the voices of detransitioned girls and women are becoming louder and louder. And if we are smart enough in the feminist movement, then we need to amplify those voices, because those are the voices that are going to speak to the girls who are still in that process.
The choice I've made is to, instead of changing my body and instead of cutting away pieces of myself to please that system, I'm going to try and change the system. No matter where you are, there are aspects that are dangerous and terrifying about being a woman. And if we don't change that now, then we are just going to continue on this path of changing women and losing women to wanting to be a man because they cannot possibly survive in this society.
You carry on doing your work, you carry on doing activism, writing, doing academic research, doing political work, you carry on talking to all women and all those bulimic girls and anorexic girls and the girls who thought that by having a breast implant or by removing the breast that they can sort of do away with the internalized misogyny. Like all those women and all those girls, some of them are going to come back, some are not, but many of them are going to come back, and you just keep moving forward.
As a woman, an adult human female, I understand rather painfully that my experiences are not unique or isolated. Because to this day, I have yet to come across a woman with no history of sexual abuse of some form in her life. The situation in India, much like other developing countries, is a lot worse than it seems. Queer theory and gender identity mobs have infiltrated schools, social media, online stores, and the minds of gullible young girls. In the past decade, many young women, some of whom were underage, managed to acquire the services of a private surgeon that could perform a double mastectomy and hysterectomy on perfectly normal bodies. And these surgeries are ridiculously expensive. Sharing their personal accounts on YouTube, they painted a picture of paradise, wooing others to follow their footsteps. There are thousands of members in support groups for trans-identified females where mastectomy is the most discussed topic. Indian social media is also filled with endocrinologists and activist surgeons offering competitive prices and packages for the entire process. Hormones, tests, surgeries, the works. One of them even claims that transition is a great way to be free from menstrual pain forever, while underplaying the life-threatening consequences of these irreversible procedures. The Indian government recently made sex reassignment surgery free of cost in government hospitals in every state. This came shortly after the trans bill was passed with a complete mix-up of the word sex and gender. On January 5, 2021, the Bombay High Court allowed a trans-identified man to contest village panchayat polls in women's category, saying that such persons have the right to self-perceived gender identity. I shudder to think if such provisions will soon be applicable for access to female toilets and other safe spaces for women. During the COVID lockdown, a popular mainstream media glorified a trans-identified female for distributing rations to other trans-identified females. The goodie bag had rice, pulses, vegetables, and an injection of testosterone, and was distributed to more than 250 people in just one city. There has been no scrutiny over procurement of hormones in such high quantities. Instead, this person was hailed a hero. This is at a time when women still can't get a morning after pill without a doctor's prescription, even when a prescription is not required by law. A developing country riddled with abject poverty, illiteracy, despicable healthcare, and a fascist government makes for a dangerous society for women. Add to this the evils of caste system, religious extremism, and racial prejudices. It feels absurd and defeatist to even summon the courage to stand against it. I'm thankful that when I wanted to cut my breasts off, such practices were unheard of in my town. But I worry about the future we are leaving behind for our children, especially girls in developing countries. We have this one life, and we must have the opportunity to live it the way we want. But this industry of hate that gaslights girls into turning against themselves infuriates me. The thought of an entire generation of kids turning around and asking us, "Where the hell were you? Why didn't you do anything?" keeps me up at night. So I want this film to offer a perspective that the genderists are actively trying to conceal. A perspective that is not phobic of anything, but one that puts women and girls above everything else. A perspective that encourages young girls to appreciate their bodies and that there are no alterations required. I have taught myself to be proud of my sex class against all odds. I derive my strength and determination from the achievements of other women around the world. There is so much to feel proud about being female. And if I could go back in time, I would hug my younger self and tell her exactly that.